Well, it's good to see you again, Mr. President. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you here. You know, since the last report, I think the economy is a little bit more turbulent with what's going on in Europe and high unemployment. And I've said this, that the business is better than the mood right now, but that we have to be concerned. I think we've tried to take an approach that's kind of short, medium, and long. When we were with you in June, we laid out kind of a first phase of ideas. Jeff Zients has done a great job of helping us get them executed within the administration, so we're making some good momentum there. This report came out today. We highlight 5 initiatives: infrastructure and energy, high growth enterprises, really a national investment initiative to try to improve the amount of investment in the U.S., regulatory activity and reform simplification, and a focus on training and education. We think this is a broad and deep report with lots of recommendations. You know, it's our hope that we get a combination of private sector engagement, good engagement from the administration, and bipartisan legislation. We will continue our work, even if all of those 3 things aren't present, and we will labor on in our activity. The Council, really, Mr. President's done a great job. I've been involved in a lot of these activities. Everybody is all in. I think we're all committed to try to get the economy on better footing and to try to create jobs and competitiveness. So that's where we are, and I appreciate all your great support.
Well, let me just make a few remarks up front, and then really what I want to do is hear from all of you. First of all, I had a chance to read the full report last night, and I think it's outstanding. I think you guys did extraordinary work. Jeff, I want to thank you for your leadership on guiding this whole process. I think you have been steady and focused on how can we make sure that we're creating an economy that not only deals with the immediate problem of putting people back to work, but also how do we create a foundation for long-term opportunity for all people, and a growth agenda that is going to make sure that businesses are created here, that businesses stay here, and that they prosper here. You know, as I look at the introduction of the report, the quote that stands out, "We need a sense of urgency and a bias for action," is something that I think we all feel acutely. And the fact that you've been able to organize around 5 key steps that I think you'd be the first to acknowledge isn't all that needs to be done, but are key areas where we should be able to generate some strong bipartisan agreement and get action going quickly, I think makes it really extraordinary. Couple of things I'll just remark on in terms of the general context. As you pointed out, I think at the beginning of this year, when we started the Jobs Council, I think all of us felt fairly confident that the economy could grow quickly enough that we could start bringing the unemployment rate down, even if it wasn't moving as quickly as we might like. But generally, the blue chip projections were somewhere between 3% and 4% growth. We have had a very tough string of events over the course of the last 10 months. You had the Arab Spring, which shot up oil prices far higher than any of us anticipated. You've got the tsunami in Japan, which affected supply lines globally. You had, most prominently, the situation in Europe, which has created great uncertainty for businesses across the board. And then, unfortunately, Washington got involved in a self-inflicted wound with the debt ceiling fiasco. And all those things, I think, led to both consumers and businesses taking a big step backwards and saying, we are just not sure where this thing is going. As a consequence, projections now in terms of growth are significantly lower than they were. And the situation in Europe in particular is one in which we're spending a lot of energy talking to our counterparts across the Atlantic, trying to make sure that they handle this in a way that stabilizes the economic situation in the coming months. So we've had a string of events that have darkened the outlook, and that makes the actions that are being recommended by the Jobs Council that much more important, because these are areas where we actually have control of the situation. We could do these things, and there's no doubt about the fact that it would have a significant market impact on job growth right now. Couple of comments, and then what I want to do is, I think, hear directly from, I think we've got some people who want to remark on each of the various categories. First of all, with respect to infrastructure, the council here is quoted as saying, if there is one thing that Washington should be able to agree on, rebuilding our infrastructure should be one. I mean, when you've got the AFL and the Chamber of Commerce agreeing on anything, that's a sign that it's a good idea. I think you document as well as anybody has the incredible opportunities at a time when contractors are begging for work, which means they're willing to come in on time, under budget. You've got millions of construction workers who've been laid off as a consequence of the housing bubble going bust, who are ready to get on the job. You've got interest rates never been lower, and you've got this crying need, and as you point out in the report, this is a twofer. This is one where we can not only get immediate job growth, but it also lays the foundation for long-term productivity and efficiencies that'll make a difference for every company represented around this table. So the American Jobs Act, the jobs plan that I put forward before Congress, obviously has a very significant infrastructure component. It incorporates a lot of the ideas that were contained in this bill, because in the Job Council report, because one of the things that you mentioned was not only do we need the infrastructure, we have to streamline the approval process so that we can actually get these projects moving more quickly than they have in the past. And so we've already identified, Gene, is it 11 or 14? 14. We've already identified 14 high-priority projects in which the permitting process has been significantly expedited. And we're doing that through administrative action. Our goal is, if this serves as an effective model for us being able to move those 14 quickly, that we can then replicate that across the board, and the significant investment that was made could have a much more rapid impact than what we've seen before. With respect to the next area, which is support for small business, and emphasizing high-growth firms. Many of the recommendations that you gave, we've already been trying to implement. We have a task force that, along with Select USA, has been looking at, for example, how can we move forward on easing the burdens and allowing IPOs to move more quickly. Are there regulatory constraints on small businesses as they move forward that we can start eliminating? So where we can act administratively, we've tried to do so. In some areas, we might require some additional legislation. For example, on the high-skill immigration area, that's not something that we can necessarily do on our own. We can expedite some of the visas that are already in place and try to streamline that process to make it move faster. We may need some legislative help on that area. With respect to the National Investment Initiative, I know that we've, if I'm not mistaken, some of the Job Council already had a chance to meet with the Secretary of State to figure out how we can deal with visas and travel promotion. There are other areas where we think that bringing together an interagency approach and making sure that we are knocking down any barriers that are out there for direct investment here in the United States and job creation, that we're going to prioritize those. I welcome the ideas that have already been put in place. With respect to regulatory review, as you know, we are already in the process of a look back that has identified billions of dollars in potential savings, eliminating paperwork, but we want to pursue some of the additional ideas that have been put forward. And obviously, with respect to skills and improving the capacity of our workforce to get the jobs of the future, that's something that spans both our education department as well as our Department of Labor. And I know that Hilda, Arnie Duncan, and others are working aggressively on trying to implement many of the ideas that you put forward. So I guess the bottom line is this. Jeff, as you pointed out, some of the recommendations contained in the Job Council require legislative action. And these days, things don't move as quickly through Congress as we would like. But there are certain ideas that are contained in this Jobs Council report that historically have received bipartisan support, and the election is 14 months away or 13 months away. We can't wait until another election before we start acting on some of those ideas. The American Jobs Act that I'm putting forward obviously contains many ideas like infrastructure investment that should be pretty straightforward, and our hope is that we're able to get those passed in the next couple of months. But we're not going to wait for Congress. So my instruction to Jeff and Jean and Valerie and all the advisors who are sitting around the table is scour this report, identify all those areas in which we can act administratively without additional congressional authorization, and just get it done. And we've already been able to get a significant number of your recommendations implemented, but we want to do more. You know, we will have a very vigorous follow-up process to make sure that anything that's within our authority to do as an administration, we start doing immediately, and we don't wait for Congress because the American people can't afford to wait. They need help right now. All right?
Great, Mr. President. So with that, you know, we'll just kind of do a quick whip around on some of the ideas, and feel free to stop or ask for more, and we'll be really to the point on where we go.
Good.
I thought it'd be good to have Laura just maybe put the whole report in some context, and then we'll go through the various elements.
Well, it's, I think we've just had the president put the whole report in context, so I won't say very much other than to say, you know, we've always thought of this as 3 phases of work. This is the second phase. It's an interim report. The report focuses on a series of what we hope are practical, targeted proposals across 5 initiative areas. We refer to in the report that think of these as kind of business plans in each area, things that might be implementable. I agree with the focus that you've said, to the extent that there are things here that the administration can act on that don't require legislation, don't require funding. We've really tried to put as many of our ideas as possible down that would allow for movement now. And you have a terrific team that has already proven that they can execute and will execute. So I would say I just want to emphasize here how really I've been overwhelmed by the degree of dedication and engagement of this group. Very, very serious, very, very committed to jobs and competitiveness. I think part of the commitment is because they realize that they're working with an administration that actually will take the ideas and try to make them happen. So we talk a lot about partnerships between business and government. I think this council and its work with the administration is a wonderful example of partnership. Partnership focused in a pragmatic way on getting things done. So, and I think it was very important the way we ended the executive summary here to say there are 25 million reasons why all of us have to act right now and think differently, and those are the 25 million Americans who would like to have a full-time job and do not have one. So that energizes all of us. I hope we can work with you to get these, some of these proposals implemented. We have complete faith in the administration to want to work with us. We want to work with you.
Great. So we were going to start with Steve and John and Cheryl on high growth enterprises, and Steve?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for kicking off the discussion with a discussion around entrepreneurs, because that really is the secret sauce that helped build America and made us the leading economic power. These Fortune 500 companies don't just come by accident. Thomas Edison started General Electric, or more recently, obviously, Steve Jobs starting Apple and ushering in the whole digital revolution. That's why we're such a strong force economically in the world. And it's also the major job creator. The statistics suggest that for the last 3 decades, 40 million jobs have been created by high-growth entrepreneurial companies. It accounts for all the net job creation. So we're going to focus on jobs and focus on competitiveness. We need to focus on entrepreneurship. And kicking off this discussion with really a commitment to doubling down on our nation's entrepreneurs really is quite important. As you see in the report, there's no silver bullet here. We've identified, after months of work, we're talking to dozens of folks, really looking at all the proposals already out there. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to curate the best ideas out there and analyze them with the help of McKinsey and others. We put them in a framework, and there's some things that the administration can do, as you said, that we'll work with your team to make that happen. There's some things the private sector can do, and we've also identified specific things there. And there's also some things that really do require congressional support, and we'll be pushing for that. Two in particular that I wanted to focus your time on, and maybe Cheryl and John can add to it. One does relate, as you mentioned, to high-skilled immigration, and we understand the complexities of immigration and the sensitivities about it, but given our nation's priority right now on jobs and the economy, unbundling the issue of high-skilled workers from this comprehensive immigration discussion we think is important. It was brought home again this morning. We had a meeting with entrepreneurs here in Pittsburgh. One entrepreneur started a company, is working on mobile apps for health, and in 6 months he's worried he's going to be kicked out of the country and have to kind of shut down his business. I talked to the woman who heads the Carnegie Mellon computer science department. She said 70% of their PhDs are coming from out of the country, and we're basically sending them back. This is crazy that we're attracting the best and brightest to this nation, and then once we give them these great educations, we're forcing them to leave to work for companies that compete with us. If Jeff did that at GE, attracted the best people to the GE Training Center, and once they graduated said, now you must go compete with us, nobody would think that's acceptable. And everybody agrees. It's sort of a common sense thing. Traveling around talking to folks, everybody agrees we need to win the global battle on talent, but it gets caught up in the politics of immigration. So we really need to focus on the politics of jobs and competitiveness in the economy, and that's a front burner issue, and Cheryl will talk about that. The second one we wanted to focus on relates to access to capital, and particularly IPOs, initial public offerings. But one surprising statistic is 90% of jobs are created after companies go public. So if we get more young companies public sooner, we'll have more jobs created. The reason is most companies, if they can't go public, end up getting sold. If companies get sold, jobs often decelerate. If they go public, they often accelerate. A lot of the financial reform, which is perfectly appropriate to deal with some of the problems, have made it more difficult and more costly for young companies to go public. As a result, the number of companies with small IPOs under $50 million has dropped from 80% in the 90s to 20% today. Most of those companies are instead getting sold, and we don't see the same job creation. So looking at ways to have additional carve-outs around these young companies so they can go public sooner and we can get that job creation engine continue to move is critical. But the key is there's no silver bullet. It's going to require a sustained effort over a decade of Congress doing its part, the administration is doing its part, the private sector doing its part. But we're confident we can create millions of jobs. The initial analysis was very promising. We'll be working on fine-tuning that in the next couple of months. But if we really double down on our nation's entrepreneurs, we really can meaningfully move the needle in terms of jobs and competitiveness. And Cheryl, now I'll turn it to you to talk a little more about immigration and John on IPOs.
Yeah, well, thank you. First, thank you for being here, obviously, and thanks to Steve for his tireless leadership of our working group. You know, on the immigration front, we really do have an issue that we have all of these amazing graduates graduating, and companies like ours, we're going to hire them. We're going to hire them here, or we're going to hire them elsewhere. And by making us able to hire them here, as you know, we then get all the ancillary jobs. So the data says that for every H-1B visa, another 5 jobs are created, and usually right in proximity. And so one of the goals as we think about doubling down on entrepreneurship is extending those visa programs so that we can keep, you know, the more than 50% of the people who are getting computer science degrees, for example, postgraduate level, are from other countries. We don't want to send them back and hire them there. We want to hire them here. You know, even in this economy, as I know you've had a chance to visit Facebook, you just visited LinkedIn, the part of our economy that's growing right now is the high-tech sector. And that's something that offers promise, not just for those jobs, but also beyond that. So we just worked with the University of Maryland to look at the Facebook ecosystem of jobs. And independent sources said that there are about 200,000 high-tech jobs created, not just in Silicon Valley, but around the country because of the Facebook platform, and so many other platforms are doing the same thing. But even beyond that, we've now looked, and there are millions of small businesses that are using Facebook just to grow their own business. And these are not high-tech businesses. These are garden centers and bakeries and the average, you know, the kind of jobs that go throughout our economy. John earlier was talking about use of the web. And the development of technologies doesn't just create jobs in the tech field, but can make all of our companies more efficient. And I know you're a big supporter of that, but we'd like to see these recommendations. And then I'll just add a final word on what all of us care about, which is long-term education. You know, you've done more than I think anyone could have wanted you to do on education, and I think the business community has a real responsibility to stand with you. We were talking earlier, Antonio asked the question, are we going to be competitive for the next generation? And the results of our education system say the answer is no. And that is a crisis. It's a long-term and a short-term crisis, and I think as the business community, as the Jobs Council, we really want to do what we can do to support your efforts to go even further in educational reform for our children and for our future.
John?
Mr. President, Steve has covered the importance of IPOs really very well. And the U.S. IPO system for small companies is broken. A great company like Apple would not have been able to grow without a small IPO, not a big IPO that Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley might underwrite, but for the smaller, more innovative companies. And this is really an unintended consequence of the Sarbanes-Oxley rule, which has made it cost on average $8 million for a new small company to go public, and the Spitzer decree and something called the Fair Disclosure Act. These can and should be amended, and if we do that, we believe we can get a vibrant economy, a vibrant capital source for America's smaller companies. You've heard me before give grades to America's innovation with an A+ grade for the smartphones and the iPads, a B grade for the innovative medical devices, and a C for where we stand on energy and energy innovation. And there's recommendations in this report that I think are very important to speed up, with appropriate concerns for public safety, approval of medical devices and new therapeutic drugs. Those jobs are moving overseas right now. We should act on that. That's under the administration's control. And then the third area is energy innovation. There's very little doubt in my mind that the Chinese are dumping their solar panels below cost. We've got to figure out as a country, are we gonna compete in that great new market opportunity? And if we're gonna compete, how?
So this is underway, the work on small and high-growth business, Mr. President. I think, you know, we've got a lot of momentum. It is the job creator, and we're going to keep this stuff going forward. And I think this has got momentum of its own, and it creates jobs. So,
Well, just a couple of comments. I mean, I think that after reading your report, the financial reforms that took place in Sarbanes-Oxley and the Spitzer Declaration, I think need to be examined. This is always a little bit tricky. There's one of the challenges of the decentralized system of our founders, and then the fact that the SEC, for example, is a independent agency. So, you know, one of the questions I'd have, John, Steve, Cheryl, is have we begun to engage with both the relevant congressional committees, but also, in this case, the SEC, the relevant agency, to see how we can get those carve-outs that you described. Because this makes sense to me. If you've got smaller companies, they are not going to have the legal and accounting help at the costs, at the magnitude that a GE is going to have if it decides it wants to go into the capital markets, and trying to figure out how to balance making sure that they don't get themselves into trouble, but that they're also not priced out of the market is critical. Do we have a set of concrete proposals in terms of how a carve-out like that might look like?
Yeah, we do have some concrete proposals, and the process of making them really was discussions with a lot of groups, and so I think they're pretty clear. And I also emphasized on behalf of entrepreneurs, we didn't really want to publish a report and then put it on the shelf, and, you know, people are going to get mobilized to try to get these things to, you know, be put into action and keep the pressure on the administration. I think a lot of steps have been taken. A lot of people in this room have done great work, but we need some leaps, not just some steps. And the private sector does need to do more, and through Startup America Partnership, we're pushing folks to do more. But Congress needs to step in as well, and we are going to try to build bipartisan support. Based on the initial discussions we've had, we've talked to a lot of people, this is an area that does have bipartisan support. Exactly what those policies are, there'll be some debates, but the need to win the global battle of talent, the need to improve access to capital, the need to reduce some of the regulations on that impact these high growth companies, there is broad support for that. So we just need to work in the coming months with your support and your leadership to make sure it really is a priority.
Yeah, well, Gene, I would say having not only the NEC, but also Treasury engage with you guys immediately and trying to get a sense of what tweaks to Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, might be required, starting to speak to the relevant committee chairman, seeing how this might be structured. The more granular and specific we can get, the more quickly we might be able to get something done on this.
Good. I think on infrastructure, we're in violent agreement. You know, Rich and Robert and Lou were teed up to talk, but maybe you know, this is one where, whether I'm at the BRT or other meetings, I don't hear anybody disagreeing with the need to build infrastructure, not a person. So I don't know if any of my colleagues want to say anything, or if you want to ask any questions of the council on this one, but I don't, you know, I think this is like, well, we say, we got to find a way to move some product here. So that's kind of the question. And then I welcome anybody to tee in here, but we can take it however you want to go.
I mean, I think the only comment I'd make right now is that the proposal we have in the American Jobs Act would pull forward $50 billion in infrastructure investment. This is an investment we're going to have to make anyway. So we can do it now, or we can do it later. Now's the time to do it. I don't know how Congress will respond to the overall package, but our expectation is if they don't pass the whole package, we're going to break it up into constituent parts. And having the relevant businesses get behind an effort to move this infrastructure agenda forward is a priority. Now, the one thing I want to emphasize is that we took very seriously this notion that siting and delay is a problem. And again, we've already identified 14 high-profile, high-impact projects where we are streamlining our ability to get this thing done. I think last time we were here, Matt, you mentioned this specifically, and I think we've been trying to pursue it. So my instructions to my agencies are, within the constraints of making sure that people are safe and we're not wasting taxpayer money on these projects, let's do them as quick as we can. But we're going to need a push, I think, from the business community in particular in order to get this across the finish line. And I would just make one last point. You know, the Recovery Act had an infrastructure component. And at the time, a lot of folks said that, well, you know, it's going to be very hard to spend out this money in an efficient, effective way. 80% of the Recovery Act funds targeted for surface transportation was spent out. The projection was we would have only spent out 55% at this point. We've spent out 80% of it. And if I'm not mistaken, and Gene, you may have the figures at the tip of your, on the tip of your fingers here, but less than 1% of the overall funding indicated that there were any problems in terms of a fraud or misallocation of resources, et cetera. I mean, an extraordinarily low number. We were able to maintain high quality control while spending this out in a very quick and effective way. partly because there's so much need out there, that it's not like we're having to hunt for a lot of projects that, could be ready to go, so. anybody
Rich, you
wanna
want
comment?
to, you want anything?
Well, I just thought that I would summarize what the report said and then pass it over to Robert and to Lou for some comments on infrastructure. First, let me thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership and for bringing together this pretty diverse group of people from business and labor. And also, I do want to recognize this council's, under Jeff's leadership and under Laura as co-chair of the infrastructure, for recognizing and helping establish a growing sense of urgency around the jobs crisis in this country. I think they've done, both of them have done an outstanding job. So I will highlight the recommendations of the council for investing in new area infrastructure. The first one is to reauthorize the main Federal Surface Transportation Act instead of relying on temporary extensions and ensure that they focus on performance and accountability. The second is leverage and expand existing public-private financing mechanisms to increase private capital for infrastructure investment. The third is create a new national infrastructure financing organization to complement existing programs to attract private capital to infrastructure projects in a variety of sectors. Fourth, take actions to protect and preserve the user-based funding of the Highway Trust Fund by reducing restrictions on user-generated funding for highway use. 5, speed implementation of the next generation of air traffic control system through a combination of regulatory and administrative changes and additional federal funding for the next generation capabilities that are available today. Next, promote construction of broadband networks and new technologies to reach the 7% of Americans, predominantly in rural areas, who don't have access to broadband, and then deploy broadband to underserved areas of the country by modernizing the FCC's Universal Service Program and develop programs to close the digital divide. And the last was streamline approval and permitting processes for job-rich infrastructure projects, which have already started to do and highlighted and actually specifically named the projects that you spoke about earlier. We want to commend you for that and tell you that we're ready to work with you and to fight for infrastructure, not, quite frankly, not just what's political possible, but what this country needs to get ahead and to make us more effective and competitive as a nation. And now I'd turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, Rich. Jeff, Mr. President, I want to start by saying we have had a great committee that was highlighted by our infrastructure summit with the leadership of Valerie and Secretary LaHood, where we all came together and actually everyone participated and went to Texas for the day. And we also had the chamber along with the AFL-CIO as our bookends. I've been asked to talk about 2 topics on the National Infrastructure Bank. One, to reiterate some of the principles, and secondly, which is not into the report, but to say in the public domain why it is not a GSE, which I think there's a lot of confusion in Congress right now. First, as you know, you've been a big sponsor of infrastructure since '07 when you were the senator and prior to that, but it creates jobs. It's the best multiplier of jobs. It's a 1.6 multiplier, and that doesn't impact all the other things that tangentially come along with it, as well as it directly employs a lot of the people where right now they're looking for jobs, like in the construction. We're happy that the White House has moved along with us to a broad sector approach, not just surface transportation, but also water treatment, energy, as well as other areas of transport, focusing on, aviation. We're not removing anything that's currently done, so this will be in addition to TIFIA and whether what the FCC is doing or other things, but it will be regional and nationally significant. It will be merit-based, so all funding decisions are going to be rigorous cost-benefit analysis. And it will be self-sustaining. So only loans and loan guarantees, no grants, except for where it's very small amounts for feasibility studies. And lastly, it will be wholly owned, an independent agency funded by the Treasury. So now I'm happy to emphasize why it's not a GSE, because we have continually written about this, but for some reason it's not being read. One, it is a fully government-owned and would have no private sector shareholders. So the conflicts that can arise in balancing private sector shareholders' interests against a public mission does not exist. Two, its aim is to be self-sustaining only, not profit-oriented. Three, it avoids any misalignment and interests that the financial problems were occurred during the failure of Fannie and Freddie. And then most importantly, the biggest difference is the National Infrastructure Bank has no leverage. It will not borrow to support its programs and will have no debt. The loans will be deployed at the project level, placing most of the burden for project funding on the sources outside of the federal taxpayer. These loans are not obligations owned by the bank. They are obligations owed to the bank, which is a big difference than the past. And once again, there's no debt, there's no government guarantees. We know it's going to take some time to build an infrastructure bank or financing authority, that people like to use that term instead of a bank, which is fine. But there is no more urgent time than today. This has been on the docket for multiple years, and we're fully supportive of moving forward. That's in your Recovery Act to get this done. There's a lot of private financing, and the report goes over that, that's ready to be deployed.
Robert, just to pick up on the structure of the infrastructure bank, and I'll try to illustrate my understanding of it. You have this financing authority. It says to a region that wants to build a new bridge, here's a loan. We understand that there's going to be a funding stream as a consequence of the loan we're providing. The regional authority is able to leverage additional private sector dollars. They've also identified an ongoing funding stream, whether it's a user fee or something. And as a consequence, what do you anticipate for every dollar that's lent by the federal authority, what kind of private sector money could you potentially?
So we looked at the AIFA, which is I think about $10 billion they set aside. And we believe it's scored that that $10 billion would equate to about $100 billion in subordinated debt. The debt would be subordinated at the project level.
So you're looking at 10 to 1?
And then you get the private sector money to come in. We think 10 billion could equate to somewhere around 250 billion plus of projects. And we have developed our team, working in the subcommittee, all different ideas, whether it's an aviation idea or a water treatment idea that gets done.
So for each sector you'd have.
We have different
some different
ideas
models.
of how the financing would work, and working alongside with Gene's group at the NEC to see if we're on kind of the same schedule.
Almost every other country in the world has something. like
Everybody
this,
has
so
this.
This is not a novel, approach.
In fact, we're somewhat unique in not allowing as much private participation in the financing of infrastructure projects. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, Brian could add, it's working well, not through, through the FCC and through broadband. It's working well a lot on the private sector already.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the points in the report too, and it's a whole nother conversation which I won't go into on broadband, how we get adoption. But sticking with what you said, the leverage there is.
Gene?
Right now, Mr. President, one of the sticking points is it appears the Senate likes it, but currently in the House, they seem to like things done at the state level and the local level. But this is apples and oranges. We're talking about things regionally significant or nationally significant, which couldn't get municipal financing or even go cross-state. So there's a lot of confusion right now on what you're depicting versus the accuracies in the House.
Gene, do you feel at this point that in terms of design, there is we're starting to get some consensus on how this thing would be designed. I know that Kerry and Hutch,
Well, we,
Kay Bailey Hutchinson.
you know, this
had
is a
that.
place where we did, you know, you always say if you have a better idea, we'll take it. We put out the infrastructure bank in the State of the Union as being located in transportation and being about transportation projects, based both on the Job Council recommendations and the fact that Senator Kerry and Kay Bailey Hutchinson had reached a bipartisan agreement. We actually went along with that because we actually liked it better, because it's independent, and we like the idea of reaching the energy, water, you know, programs are very, very important to a lot of people who support it. And every project can only be funded 50% through the government. So it, by definition, requires significant private sector participation. So, you know, we feel this is the right place. I think they have some bipartisan support in the Senate, and I think it is now getting movement on that, and then hopefully we could build bipartisan support in the House too, which we have not at this point seen.
Okay.
Good. Lou, anything quick on transmission?
Yeah, I'm not going to go through our whole proposal, you've read it, but the one problem with infrastructure is how to fund it, right? And that's going to be the debate. But for transmission siting, we don't need any government money. There's the desire and means by the electric utility industry to invest, and the backlog of projects is enough that'll supply jobs, 50 to 70,000 jobs a year for 20 years, and that'll facilitate another probably 100,000 to 200,000 jobs. We just need the current process is broken. We have a proposal to fix it, and it's modeled off of what the federal government currently does with natural gas pipelines, and that works. And I'll shut up with that.
So we already have a specific proposal in hand that we could begin moving right away.
Right away. And there is a state versus federal government issue associated with it, but the current process is broken. It doesn't work. It takes anywhere from 8 years to 15 years to site a new transmission line. There's huge benefits besides the jobs, lower, more reliable electricity, better environment. It's more than a twofer.
Essentially, we can't set up a smart grid of any sort in the absence of fixing this process.
And this is so linear from the job standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, it's just night follows day, and I think it's easy to calculate, and it's in our hands, so. Since we're on a roll, business guys like to talk about regulation. Maybe we'll carry forward on Mark and Matt.
You know, on the regulation side, I'd say that when you think about regulations, you don't get that excited, but actually this process may be quite exciting. Because what's happened is it doesn't end up being a look down at your shoes exercise. You know, there's so many things that can be improved, and the administration's really engaged us in that discussion. So, we've tried to approach this in two ways, on a broad basis and then on a targeted basis. On a broad basis, two specific ideas were generated. One that Lou led the discussion on working with the regulatory bodies that are independent, the IRCs. And then Matt led the discussion on permitting. On the IRCs, our basic view was the IRCs need to have a consistent strategy of doing cost benefit. Right now, the FTC, the FCC, both do it. They both change their strategy, primarily based, I think, on your look-back efforts, which resulted in them consistently saying, okay, if I'm looking back and going to look at it that way, I'll do it now. But it's not done across the board on the IRCs. And that was one of Lou's recommendations. The second was that, just like OIRA looks and tries to make some judgment on the executive agencies, let's have an independent agency look, not decide on, since they're independent, but look at regulations from an IRC basis. And there doesn't seem to be downside to that. It provides some governor without the hammer. It gives people the opportunity to understand what they're doing. So those were the two. On permitting, I'll hand it over to Matt.
So we did talk about it in Raleigh-Durham, and you've heard a lot today already that there's no silver bullet to some of this stuff. Well, there is a silver bullet to this one. And we gave you 5 recommendations. Your staff's done a really good job. The administration has stepped up with the 14 projects. I view that as a tactical way to address this. We need truly a systemic way going forward. We still have a couple of issues that I think are very important to complete the silver bullet. One is putting a time shot clock on this stuff, and we've seen that in some of the states. It's worked very effectively. And then the second is a permit litigation risk, which we know is out there, and it really is something that drags this stuff down quite dramatically. You mentioned that you want to take these 14 and replicate them. We just want to continue to push it, and the administration as well as the Congress, that what we really need is to fix this once and for all. We've got, I think, a big appetite. It bleeds across the transportation infrastructure piece and the regulatory piece. And then finally, we're going to continue to offer up lots of ideas on a regulatory roadmap. We've put one out. Even some of my fellow job panel members thought it was a little strong, but we're going to start there and find a way to really ease the burden of regulation to improve the competitiveness of the U.S. worker. I spent a couple hours on the plane yesterday looking at H.W. Bush's regulatory regime, President Clinton's regulatory regime, and it's disappointing because what we see, we're still dealing with the same issues over and over and over again. And I know that what you're going to be hearing a lot of us talking about competitiveness, and regulatory buildup, the burden of regulatory issues is a huge issue to our economy.
You know, Mr.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, Mark, go ahead.
You know, I just wanted to come back to two things on the targeted efforts we've made and talk about them. And before I do, just two comments on what Matt just said. We asked this administration to get us a dashboard, get the information and get us a dashboard built on permits. And that's happening. You know, they took that and ran with it. We asked for 10 projects, 10 nationally important projects. You'd come back today with 14. The 14 projects are really a little petri dish on what we can do to see if we can make our regulation consistently, fundamentally change in terms of its speed while maintaining whatever protections we need to maintain. So I think that's why I look at this and say there's gold in these hills. You know, if you're really trying to make change, you've got to have an engaged administration, and right now we've got it. We've made 5 very targeted recommendations, and some of them are red, some yellow, some green, but we've made some real, in terms of improvement, we've made a recommendation specifically on patents that's really moved quickly. We've made a recommendation on the FDA, which we're hoping they'll come back to us with over the next 30 days. We've identified EB-5s and said, look, we got 10,000 visas, we're not using them. Actually, you identified it. We tried to figure out why. One of the reasons is it's a completely paper-based system. You want to get an application for an EB-5, you send a pack of paper to the government, and there's no email back and forth with the recipient. It goes back through the mail. So the administration has said, we'll change that. So there's a whole series of very targeted, specific efforts that are changing, and I think there's a lot more we can do.
Good. Just a quick comment on this area. What we've seen, as I've been pushing our agencies and administration to take a hard look at this, is exactly what Mark just said, that in any area, there's a whole bunch of underbrush that can be cleared out and made much more efficient while still achieving the objectives of public health, welfare, environmental, and so forth. And where I think the low-hanging fruit will be is those regulations that are just there on the books because nobody's really thought through over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, is this still the smartest way for us to achieve our objective? And I think that you will get a very engaged and aggressive partner in this administration in identifying those areas where there's no dispute with respect to the goal, but something's being done through paper as opposed to email, or we haven't adapted to new technologies, or the rule was written for an obsolete business model that doesn't really apply to today. On those areas, I think we're going to be able to move very rapidly. What's tougher, and I suspect Matt's going to, when you refer to sort of the systemic stuff, is where there may be a genuine judgment call with respect to what are our objectives. So, I can assure you that there are going to be certain industries where any costs imposed in order to prevent significant environmental degradation is viewed as a job killer. And we're going to have to make a decision as a society, well, how much pollution exactly are you willing to tolerate for those jobs? Because as I said in my speech before Congress, I don't think we're going to compete effectively internationally in terms of who's willing to have the dirtiest air, because we'll always lose that fight. I mean, there are going to be countries out there that don't have any environmental standards, right? And so if how we're gauging whether a particular regulation is smart or not, part of what we're trying to do is at least apply rigorous cost-benefit analysis. But there are going to be some cases where there is a genuine cost, and businesses will say, you know what, we wish we didn't have these costs. On the other hand, the benefits in terms of a lot fewer people in the emergency rooms or with asthma or what have you may be sufficiently significant that as a society we say, those are costs that we still have to bear. So I just wanted to distinguish between those two aspects of regulation. One, I think, which will be easier to move forward rapidly on. The other, which, where there's going to be just, some real judgment calls, and there's a legitimate values debate that we're going to have to be having. So.
May I?
Yeah, please.
I think that business has institutionalized a lot of the regulatory costs, and they get on. You don't hear a lot of business saying, peel this back, peel that back. I do think, and Gene was talking about how the forecast for for GDP has come down. It's come down significantly, but what's scaring everybody is the time that's come down in. It's basically from July to the October reports that were just released has gone in half. And I think one of the things that this council has to do is to say everything from here forward has to have a jobs lens to it. And I think when you look at that on a country that I think could be in a job creation crisis for the next 1 to 5 years, I think you do look at regulation differently. And I don't do a lot of regulatory costs. I do a lot of capital benefit analysis in my job. And I can assure you that the cost of the capital is usually 100% right. It's always the benefit that's messed up. And forget about your administration. A lot of this stuff starts in the U.S. Congress. The benefits, the way that we measure benefits of the cost-benefit analysis and regulatory burdens, I think is fundamentally flawed, and it is harming our economy.
The thing I'd add to that, Mr. President, is I think the place where you can help us is with the tone in some of these agencies, just to reinforce that the economy is important, as is their mission. And I think we feel, and when I'm with other CEOs, we think they're tone deaf vis-a-vis where the economy is. And that's something only you can help us with, is none of us are for lower standards. I think that actually helps us compete actually on a global basis. But there shouldn't be any agency that can escape the economic consequences of where we are today and just where the country is today. And I think you can help immensely on that. And that's the only thing I would add to this.
Jeff, I would just want to echo your point that I think the tone is so key. That was something we talked about before the president got here. And the one other point to add is between the two buckets, within the bucket that's the most problematic, there are a lot of regulations that aren't about life and death issues. They're just economic slowdown issues, and they have a purpose, and the purpose is noble. And there's always going to be a trade-off there too, but it may not be quite the same caliber of decision as sending kids to the hospital. And so I totally echo, the president worrying about we got to do what's right for the long term of the country in all respects. But there's a lot of business around this room that would say it's not all life and death stuff.
At least with respect to the executive agencies, every agency understands that, because they've been in a lot of cabinet meetings with me, and I think that they'll all echo it, those who are here, that they have to be thinking about the economy and job creation as part of the lens through which they're evaluating the actions that they're taking. As you just pointed out, Brian, there are things that are nice to do, and then there are things that are urgent to do. And part of OIRA's task has been to evaluate any new regulatory proposals under a very rigorous lens. I mean, the one thing that we've been able to, we can document that the hard benefits of regulations we proposed relative to the costs are greater than we've seen in any recent administration by a factor of 2 or 3. So the job is to evaluate this stuff very rigorously, make sure that we distinguish between what's urgent and what would just be nice if the economy was humming along at 5% growth. Keep jobs in mind. And as a consequence, I think we can make some significant progress on areas where, regardless of where you land across the political spectrum, you say to yourself, you know, this isn't a smart regulation. And if it's not smart, it shouldn't be done. Having said that, the only reason I raised this was because I don't want to paper over the fact that once we make all the regulations smarter, eliminate the dumb ones, and so forth, there's still going to be some tensions that exist around, well, you know, how much do we value this extra 10,000 jobs versus these extra 100,000 asthma cases? And those are
Fair enough.
tough decisions that have to be made and have to be discussed both in Congress as well as within the administration.
Good. We only have a brief period of time. Antonio, just a quick update on the National Investment Initiative.
Very good. Mr. President, a lot of people have worked on this report. We work with your staff. We work with with the Department of Commerce, think tanks, economists, all sorts of people. The issue that we're trying to deal with is the tremendous decline in foreign direct investment into the country. The U.S. became the large economy of the world because it was the best place to invest and grow. And if you go back to the 1990s, we used to attract up to 26% of the global FDI. Today, it's only 17%. That is obviously very concerning. It is more concerning if you dig into that 17%, because you'll find that only 2.5%, for instance, comes from the combination of Brazil, China, and India, which are very important economies for the future. Why does this matter? I have some data here that shows the importance of the subsidiaries of foreign companies in our country. Even though they're only less than 1% of the U.S. business, in the private sector they have 5% of the job, 11% of the capital investment, 14% of the R&D, 18% of the good exporters, and they pay 1/3 more than the average salary. So what's happened is that the country is becoming less attractive for those investments, and that is what we have to change. We have put a goal, an aggressive goal, of $1 trillion of FDI into the country for the next 4 to 5 years. We have a lot of activities. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to read you some of those. The way we think we can do that is first creating some innovation investment zones that will be in combination with great universities, which we have the best in the world. The idea is that there will be incentives for the for the companies that invest there, that get jobs, and they get R&D and IP created. Partnerships between the U.S. companies and the government, such that we can bring back into the country some of the elements of the supply chain that right now reside outside the United States. Increase the resources of Select USA. I think it's a great idea, but if you put Select USA to compete with the likes of EDB in Singapore or in Ireland or anywhere else, we can't compete. So the idea will be to put more resources there, and as well to get the foreign service officers to help with the job. And it's not so it's not only to export, but as well as to get investments into the country. Another thing very important will be we know there is an issue between federal and the states as far as who has authority to do that. We have to find a way to coordinate those two things so there is a seamless operation, sort of a one-stop shop, which is what these companies will find if they go to make that investment in any other country. And then finally, consistent with what you heard before, I think we have to work in the visa policy to easily bring, when we need to high talent. Again, the goal is $1 trillion. It's an aggressive goal, but it will change this this trend that we think is very damaging for the country.
So lots of good activities on that. Had a good meeting with Secretary Clinton last week. And then lastly, on education and training, maybe Paul and Darlene just give us an update on some of the stuff we're doing there.
Sure. Mr. President, I know we're tight for time, so I'll be quick. I'll give you the Cliff Note version. We decided we have two projects ongoing. One is the so-called 10,000 engineers, and the other is on advanced manufacturing workforce that Darlene will give you an update on. The 10,000 engineer project is really going quite well. We started this because we looked at a secular stagnation of 120,000 engineering graduates a year for 30 years. It hasn't moved for 3 decades. At the same time, in the last 10 years, our college graduation rate's gone up by 50%. So the percent of kids that are going into engineering is dropping. There are 3 engineering jobs for every graduate. Hence, a lot of the jobs going offshore right now, right? Because you have to fill them somehow. So we decided to focus on undergraduate programs because the attrition rate is really quite poor. 40% of the kids drop out in the first year of engineering. 37% graduate after 4 years. For underrepresented minorities and women, it's 60%. So there's some low-hanging fruit here. For every point we move this graduation retention rate, we get 1,500 more engineers a year. So we have 2 programs to focus on this. One is allowing kids, particularly in the first and second year, to touch engineering. So we've got 65 companies to double the number of internships that we offer per year at $70 million per year cost. It sounds like small at 7,000, but if you think about the doubling, it's 14,000, which touches 25% of all of our engineering students in that category. So a big deal. The second one has to do with schools. Let's put in a consistent set of standards in engineering schools around retention and graduation. It turns out that the Big Ten is actually better at engineering than football. And some of the best engineering programs in terms of retention are in the Big Ten. So they're leading the way, Michigan and Georgia Tech in particular. They've come up with a curriculum which is a standard of excellence. The 10 schools are signed up. There's 18 more schools signed up. So we've got almost 30 schools signed up for this program. And companies will direct their hiring of interns into this program as an incentive. We've also asked the NSF to vector some of their funding in this area to schools that have achieved this standard. So that looks very good. I think we're on track to not just have 10,000 more per year, but probably be able to double the number of engineering graduates per year within 10 years, or certainly by the end of this decade, less than 10 years. And that feels pretty good. And Darlene has an update on the manufacturing.
Before we turn to Darlene,
Yep.
as you guys were researching this, did you get a sense of why, given 3 jobs for every engineering graduate, that supply wasn't filling demand here? Is it just a function of kids not being sufficiently prepared for the rigors of the engineering program, or are they not getting the signal that if you've got an aptitude for math, it turns out that your chances of being successful through an engineering degree may be higher than getting a business administration degree? What's going on there?
There's clearly some work to do in secondary schools, and we decided as a council that's our next attack, which gets the kids into the program. But once they're in the program, it's the attrition rate, which is the problem. And there the issue is if you know you want to be a fireman or a cop or a pilot, you know what those jobs are. What's an engineer? Until you can touch it, until you can touch engineering and see what it's like to work inside a company, it's very hard
to move from the abstract to something substantial. So that's why we came up with the idea of the internships and moving that to the first and second year students, because once kids touch engineering inside of a Facebook or an Intel, they say, aha, not only is it pretty cool, but I get paid pretty well.
Right.
And so it creates some of the demand that's missing, demand pull that's missing.
Ellen, you were going to add something?
Yeah, Mr. President, I partnered with the National Academy of Engineering, Chuck Vest, and we did some basic research over the last few years that shows very clearly a lack of understanding by parents and young kids, middle school kids, about what engineering is and what it could lead to. So we're starting very practically with internships, but we need to move back into the really positioning and branding of engineering.
Right.
It solves tough problems, it's collaborative, it's fun, as opposed to it's hard.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot more work we can do ongoing there.
Yeah. Darlene? Just
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Well, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, education is really key, and skills education is really critical to our success, I believe, as a country. And I'm proud to announce that we are launching programs that will develop talent to fill today's jobs and fuel tomorrow's. We believe that our program called Right Skills Now, which is a program for advanced manufacturing training that we're piloting in Minnesota, will prove that we can capture the job opportunities that result from today's skills gaps. And we're getting business community involvement. In recent studies, over 80% of manufacturers report they cannot find people to fill their skilled production jobs. And so as a result, 500,000 jobs right now are going unfulfilled. We've worked with the Manufacturing Institute to tailor their national manufacturing certification system into a national replicable fast-track solution that can deliver talent to manufacturers. So our initial accelerated program allows individuals to earn both national industry certifications and college credits in just 16 weeks, along with credits while interning at companies for an additional 8 weeks, preparing them for immediate employment in high-quality manufacturing jobs, and then giving them a solid base to advance in higher education and careers. So the Right Skills Now is going to start in January. We're doing a big kickoff in Minnesota, October 27th. It's going to be in 3 college campuses, Dunwoody College of Technology and South Central Community College. And then other partners included in this is ACT along with NIMS. And we feel that this Right Skills Now will provide an opportunity for qualified people to gain the skills that they need to contribute to the continued success of advanced manufacturing, make it here in the USA, along with increasing employment competitiveness in the USA. And at the same time, we're working with shareholders of New York State and California, and some of the industry and community colleges to develop national models for accelerated training and placement of healthcare workers into available jobs within their states. The key to all these programs is that a degree will now translate to a more readily available job. These programs will be replicable throughout the country, and all businesses, small and large, colleges, technical institutes, governments, workforce agencies can all get involved to really help close this gap that we're experiencing today and will continue to experience if we don't act now. Thank you.
really good common sense stuff, that a lot of which can be private sector funded.
Right. Right.
So we were going to end by having Roger give an update on the economy.
Poor Roger.
See if you.
Right. Well, Jeff is only to be part of the introduction. He asked me to be brief, he asked me to be factually accurate, he asked me to be chipper and upbeat. I'm going to pull all that off with front of your very eyes. So let me start with the economy. Obviously, as you well know, the economy is still working to get out of the recession. In hindsight, the recession was deeper than we had thought, for sure. And there are a lot of academics who say this type of recession is one in which recovery tends to be elongated. Having said all that, the markets, I think, are sending a number of signals. Some of them are somewhat contradictory. The fixed income market is simply telling us that the U.S. dollar and dollar-denominated assets continue to be where fixed income investors want to be. And consequently, we've seen interest rates, 10-year, 30-year rates, continuing to collapse or fall down. On the other hand, equity markets, I think, are reflecting much more volatility based on two or three things. One is the basic economy itself. We understand the backdrop. That is a kind of backdrop that leads to great uncertainty among equity investors. The second thing is, as you well know, economists have put odds on a double dip, sometimes up, sometimes down, 20, 30%, always too high. The equity markets are really quite intensely focused in on that question. And after a fairly weak first half, for a variety of reasons, the markets got very excited about the possibility of a double dip. And I think they got themselves overly excited about that. The good news is that with hindsight, it seems unlikely that we're confronting that challenge at this moment. Many economists expect that the third quarter numbers will come in with a growth rate of 2.5% or so. Clearly sluggish, clearly not enough to create the kinds of jobs that all of us want, but clearly better than a double dip. And so the double dip fears that the market had were very much like Mark Twain's demise, greatly exaggerated. I think the third thing that's going on in markets right now is a great focus in on a number of risks that the economy globally still confronts. We are entering what's called earnings seasons. Many folks around the table, plus others, will report their earnings starting yesterday, today. I think the markets are really intently interested in that to see what indications they might get about the future of corporate America and about the future of the economy. Secondly, as you well know, and you've mentioned it a few times, the uncertainty in Europe is weighing in on U.S. markets and markets globally. There's a great deal of headline risk, as we call it. So when the leaders of Germany and France announced a date certain on which there would be a plan, the markets rally. If there's any uncertainty, things will fall off. And I think the third thing that's happening in markets is very much similar to the conversations that we've had around this table, which is I think domestically markets are asking for an answer to three questions. One is there sufficient political will in the U.S., the administration and Congress, to deal with continuing to support the underlying economy that I think and many people think needs some kind of support. There's a concern that if we do nothing, the stimulus that exists in the U.S. economy right now will fall back in 2012 as a number of tax breaks and advantages expire. But I think the market is also asking two other things. One is there ability to develop a longer-term plan to deal with the deficit and debt issues, which we all understand to be unsustainable in the intermediate to long term, while we still want to make sure there's sufficient support for the economy in the short term. And then finally, I think many people are asking the fundamental question, similar to what's been asked around this table, which is can we develop in the U.S. an economy that's much more driven around savings, investment, export, as opposed to overly relying on borrowing and consumption and imports. And I think that is one of the tones that underlay the market as well. And finally, though I would say this is not a market dynamic, but I want to echo something that Cheryl and others have said. In order for us to really have a very strong, productive, dynamic economy that leads the 21st century and therefore gets reflected in equity valuations, fixed income valuations, et cetera, we really do need to focus in on education issues and really focus on thinking about our human capital. Because at the end of the day, what the market is telling us from day to day is in some sense, while very, very important, less relevant than our ability to generate wealth in the U.S. economy that then gets capitalized through our markets. So that's my very balanced, factual, upbeat, and prompt.
He's a good guy there.
Well, listen, I know we're running out of time. Jeff, I just want to, again, thank you for your leadership. I want to thank everybody who's participated. The quality of the product is outstanding. It's focused, it's specific. It's not the usual white paper stuff that gets put in a drawer, as somebody mentioned earlier. And we are acting on it. And to tie what you guys are doing with what Roger just said about the economy, there is no doubt that we still have some tough sledding before us. This was the worst crisis we've had in our lifetimes. I'm looking around the room. I don't see too many folks who were around or active, at least back in the 30s. And it is true that historically, at least after financial crises, the recessions are deeper, longer, more prolonged. We still have some big challenges internationally. Europe is the most prominent immediate challenge, but we've got some structural issues internationally in terms of imbalances, and part of it has to do with the fact that we had become the growth engine for the world based on accumulating debt and consumption. And that was not a sustainable path for us. The good news is, and it's reflected in your Jobs Council report, there's just a bunch of stuff that we can do right now that not only helps the economy immediately, but puts us on a more stable path over the long term. And most of it should not be controversial. The good news is that our problems are imminently solvable. And does not necessarily fall into the classic ideological divisions between left and right, conservative, liberal, but are just smart things to do to respond to a historic challenge that we face as a country. The bad news is that there is a big gap between sensible solutions and what either the political process seems to be willing to act on, and also I think people's perceptions, which are clouded by news reports that would make it seem as if there's nothing we can do, and that we're on automatically on a downward decline. And so I think what the Job Council's been invaluable in providing is a roadmap for the American people, not comprehensive. This is just a piece of the puzzle, but pointing to examples of where if we do some smart things now, we can have a lot better outcomes in the future, and that can help to build back a sense of competence or a sense of confidence about our ability to meet these challenges. So I just want to thank everybody for their leadership, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting.
Great. Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
President. Thank you very much.